Welcome to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I'm your host, Susie St. Angelo, and thanks for being here. Today's episode is called Communicate and Elevate, the Leader's Path to Influence. My guest today is Alanna Levenson, and you'll really enjoy this conversation because she talks about how communication can influence how successful we are in our personal relationships, our professional relationships, and how we get along with other people. There's a lot to unpack here, so stay tuned. But Alanna, since 2005, she's been a trusted guide to thousands of growth-minded and purpose-driven entrepreneurs and senior leaders from a broad range of companies. During her process, she quickly helps clients get to the root of the challenge while leveraging natural strengths for success. She's worked with clients over the last 20 years via one-on-one coaching, workshops, and team coaching. Her belief, everything you've ever done and everything you've experienced is a contribution to who you are today and who you're in the process of becoming, puts clients at ease with where they are now, inspiring them to have a fresh outlook and to take action needed to meet and exceed goals for success. So, this podcast is for you if you know you want to change something. Maybe it is your career, your health, or another aspect of your life. You might be wondering if this is the right stage or age to be doing this, to making this change. And you don't know how to start. Or if you're that person who's afraid to take that first step, caught in analysis paralysis. I see, I understand, and I used to feel the same way. And just a reminder, you can find this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeart, Apple, and Amazon podcasts. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get into today's episode and meet my guest, Alanna Levenson. Hi, Alanna. Welcome to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life.
Thanks, Susie. It's nice to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you could be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And to get started, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about your background, what you've been doing.
Gosh, it's been a journey. I'll tell you that. And I love hearing stories from other people too, in terms of their journey. But my background, I started in sales, and as far as my career goes, and I worked for a lot of startups. And I wish I could tell the story that they went public and I made all this money and. Instead, I worked for startups that failed, and I got to see firsthand why those companies didn't succeed. And I learned a lot from that. And then later on, after doing that, and most of them were tech companies or tech startups. For a while, I also worked in entertainment. That was interesting because I lived in LA for a little while and studied acting, believe it or not. And I did that also to help me. Because growing up, I was shy, and I'm naturally an introvert, and I had to do public speaking and learn how to do sales presentations. So I started taking acting lessons for fun when I moved to LA, and then I fell in love with it. So I pursued it for a little while. Never really went anywhere, but I had a great time learning, and I think that was my introduction to emotional intelligence. And then I got in a conversation with someone from junior high and high school, and they introduced me to coaching, and that was back in 2005. So I've been doing this for a long time. And even in my career as a coach, it's taken many twists and turns, but more or less, to kind of sum it up, and then I'll see what questions you have. So I've more or less been coaching for 20 years, but I've worked with thousands of people, both individually and then also collectively in groups or teams. Because at one point, just a few years ago, I had a full-time role at Cisco, the big tech company, where I was for 4.5 years. And I was part of a global team where all we did was workshop facilitation for internal teams. And I built that muscle for team coaching. So that I have a lot of tools in my tool belt per se, but
Well, that's great. I mean, that's experience. Your one thing leads to another, and you make transitions as you need to, and reevaluate things and see what's working. And so, I'm curious. In your coaching business, you do both one-on-one and team coaching. Are you seeing any themes that common themes between those two, or separately?
Wow, that's a good question. I appreciate that. Individually, so because I do work with both small business owners, entrepreneurs, as well as executives or senior leaders in various types of corporations, uh, themes I'm seeing, well, first, because I work with leaders, they want to be better leaders. And I'm also seeing, unfortunately, that companies, although here we are in almost 2025, the leadership development trainings, if they even go through them, unfortunately, they give them some good concepts, but they don't know how to support these leaders and actually implementing them. Like, what does that really mean? And translate that when they engage their team. So they don't really know what to do even when they go through those leadership development trainings. But I've gotten a lot of clients over the past few years that have never had any sort of coaching or training before, and they're not young. Most of my clients are more senior level, like director on up, which means that they're going to be in a certain age group. And it's fascinating to me. So there's that. And then because of what's happening in the world and what's become acceptable, what hasn't become acceptable, they're trying to navigate all that. And they don't, they want to be an inspiring leader, but then they're having to deal with things that I think leaders didn't have to deal with 10, 15, 20 years ago. Uh, because, and what does culture mean today? Whether that's national culture, I mean, things are really shifting in the United States. Don't necessarily want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but that translates very much in the internal work world as a whole. And then so there's that. So individually, I really see them wanting to be better leaders, wanting to inspire, wanting to engage, wanting to be better models, to model good, productive behavior. And they too want to usually grow in their own career. So we have to talk about what that looks like. And communication comes up in all of that because communication affects all relationships and very much shows up in the work world. I would say for teams, it's collaboration. It's there's this term in the corporate world called a silo. So a lot of people work in silos where they feel isolated or they are isolated and the company doesn't realize how they're contributing to that, and they don't really know how to work together. They don't also, if they are working in silos. So an easy example is, say, a sales team, because I work with sales leaders sometimes. I mean, I work with leaders in engineering, operations, customer experience, HR, marketing, sales, you name it. But in the sales arena, on a sales team, for example, you'll have sales reps that will either represent a vertical market or a geographic territory, or sometimes even a specific product or service compared to their teammates, say, right? And then so they're independently representing either these areas or these products. So what's the opportunity to bring them together in a team environment versus just an update or a download? And that's where people get bored. So a lot of leaders, will pull teams together, give them the update or download, and then those team members will walk away feeling like, okay, there was such a small percentage of that even related to me and what I'm doing. Couldn't you have just sent that to me in a report or an email that I could have read on my own? And then I've got so much on my plate. People are having to do more with less. So, there's that scheduling time struggle too amongst everybody. especially because of what's happened over the past few years and people working more virtually and the convenience of being at home, or, scheduling things back to back to back to back to back, and not giving themselves those organic breaks where in the past they might have had to walk, to their car and drive to a meeting to go meet someone in person, or walk to a different conference room, and then you've got that time in between. People don't have that anymore. They're just going from call to call to call. So that's become an issue too. I mean, I could give you more, but I think that's enough for now. Yeah.
Yeah, I know those are really interesting themes, and I want to go back to the leadership development of the leaders, because, gosh, I remember I got my leadership training initially at camp, and then in college, and then I was just thrown into management and leadership without anything, and this was back almost 30 years ago. So I can see where, people who are in leadership positions have not had any formal coaching, or they view coaching as corrective, that they need to change some behaviors that maybe an organization is requiring them to do. So I'm really pleased to hear that, that leaders definitely, especially senior leaders, are still interested in developing themselves and how they can be better leaders and better employees for their corporations. So
I can't speak for all, right? I can only speak for the ones that in my little bubble, in my little world that I work with. But I sometimes hear people make judgments about leaders and corporate and things like that. And maybe that's true for some. And believe me, I've seen those bad behaviors where it's what's called an old command and control, outdated type of style of leadership, which doesn't really work. It probably never really worked, but it very much doesn't work anymore because of how people are changing, the world is changing. But they care a lot. And it's unfortunate that a lot of companies still haven't figured out how to do this. And I think that's one of the reasons why the coaching industry has blown up the way that it has, because of the necessity for it.
yeah, I'm a health coach, and I became a health coach because I needed one. And I loved it. And I knew that I had made a shift from corporate America to health coaching. And it was a holistic experience. It encompasses the body, mind, and spirit. But, part of the podcast is all things related to our health. And it's not just diet and exercise. It's our career, it's our finances, it's our relationships, it's our home environment, our home cooking. There's so many things that contribute to our health. So I think it's really great to have you on today to talk about this and some other things that we're going to get into a little bit later. And so you talked to me a little bit this morning about being a communication expert, and I wondered if you could kind of go into a little more detail about that.
Growing up, I don't think it's rare that anybody is taught to really be a good communicator. What does that even really mean? So what I've realized in all the years that I've been coaching, and then trainings that I've had or certifications that I've achieved, where I've learned about that, it really communication, the majority of it is listening. It's not what comes out of our mouth. In fact, I forget what the exact percentages are, but the communication, there's such a small percentage of it that's actually verbal. A lot of it is nonverbal, and I've seen it looped into that little piece of the pie of communication is, say, like pitch and tonality of our voice, or pauses, or taking breaths, kind of like what I'm doing right now. But that's really in the auditory experience of what we hear. And then there's the true verbal, which is the physical life that's going on with us. And that has to do with our hand movements and our body movement. And I've also studied micro expressions on the face. I know research is constantly changing, but at one point, I don't know if it's still the same, but at one point I learned that we have 43 muscles in the face. And what's interesting is that even though, say, depending on where you're born and what hereditary genes you have in your family, whether you're Chinese or American, and our face might look different. Micro expressions and the emotional life behind it are exactly the same. It doesn't matter what actual language we're speaking, our nonverbal micro expression, facial language is the same. Whether it's, contempt or happiness or curiosity or anger or whatever it is, granted, it's happening in like a less than a fraction of a second. And so our brain is trying to process what our face is saying. And then we're also like, if we're with someone in person, not just hearing them, but if we can see them in any way, whether it's in person or even virtually like this now, because this is a very common way to communicate. For example, I might say something, use certain words, but then you're observing my body saying the opposite. And then it becomes confusing. And then your brain is trying to process what I'm actually communicating. And there might be misalignment. And so you're having to figure it out if I'm not flat out telling you. And if you don't know how to ask me questions with curiosity to say, tell me more about what that means, or I'm not really sure what you meant by that, or that's an interesting word to use. Can you help me understand what that means to you? Those kinds of things, right? I often say there's a distinction between being reactionary and being responsive. So the reaction or response. Reactionary is just like, you just react. And I think that's the place where most people are. I was too. And sometimes I'm still there. I'm not perfect. I have to practice this myself. And that's where we can get ourselves in trouble, where a lot of misunderstandings happen and misinterpretations, and then relationships end unnecessarily sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's just, it's not meant to be, whether it's a romantic or a work or a friendship or whatever it is, right? Sometimes relationships move on and we meet new people, but there's so many opportunities where they can be fixed if we just took a pause and just really listened. And so I coach people on that too. I help them become aware of language. Language to me is so important. Like what are the words that you're choosing to use? And that's where the responsiveness, it's with purpose, with intention. I'm really big on intention. And yeah, so I'll stop there.
So I too am an introvert, and I'd like to think that I'm an ambivert. I'm a social introvert, that people don't buy it. They don't believe me when I say I'm an introvert, because I've really had to work hard to do that. Like you and the acting, for me, it was taking speech classes and being involved in a sorority in college, and being involved in a nonprofit while in my corporate career and things like that have really forced me. And now, as a single woman, traveling solo and meeting new people, and they've all been great, and I'm a lot better at it. I've had to really work hard at that. And so I really have had to work hard at my communication too. And I've realized my failures in my relationships and how I didn't communicate properly, or I shut down. And I've shut down personally and professionally. And so I know that, and I'm learning. And I think that, these type of experiences, and now you've said the virtual part of communicating, and how do you show up there, and how do you show up in person? And I was always accused of being a little aloof, and I don't consider myself aloof at all, but I was probably giving off that appearance. And so, I think the fact that you're focusing on communication, because everything falls through communication, all of our relationships and how we work and how we live depend on how we communicate.
Well, and the times where somebody has said to you, if they actually use that language, Susie, you can come off as aloof. That's where I would get curious and say, that's really interesting, especially if you've been given that feedback before. I'm curious what makes you say that. What am I doing or saying, or how am I coming across to you for me to help me understand what that means? Because what they're not considering is there's a lot going on inside of you that they're not thinking about. And what I also often say is there's what we don't know, we don't know. And so that's where, with intention, you can engage in any dialogue, conversation, team meeting, at work with that level of curiosity, and then also be aware of when are you taking something personally, and do you have all the information, which most likely you don't. And this is where, if you want to understand and not just be in reaction mode, and you want to be more purposely or intentionally responsive because of whatever it is that you're trying to do, whether it's just a social relationship, or especially in the work world, where it's a team meeting and people are actually trying to get a project done, and there's conflict or disagreement, or one person wants to go in one direction, or somebody said something or looked at you the wrong way, and then all of a sudden you made that mean something, and then that spirals into some other bigger story, and then they don't even realize how that that perception takes over. I a quick anecdote. A long time ago, I was coaching this gal. She was working for a jewelry company, and she was in sales, and she wasn't one of the top sales reps, and she wanted to be. She wanted to, you know, she wanted to make more money. We all want to make more money. But how do you do that when you're in a sales role? Well, you make commission. You have your base salary usually, unless it's pure commission, and then you've got your commission, right? And then she started talking about this woman. So we were in California. She was talking about this woman that was in their New York territory, and she was the top sales rep. And I said, "That's interesting. Tell me why you think she's the top sales rep." "Oh, I don't know." She had all these judgments about her, and I got curious. I said, "So how well do you know her?" She's like, "I don't really. I just don't. I hear her on calls, and I don't really like her that much." And I'm like, "Okay, what is it that you don't like about her?" I mean, I was genuinely asking because I wanted to understand. Then I'm asking because she told me that she had to go out to New York for a sales meeting. And I said, "I have an idea for you. I don't know if you're open to it." And I said, "If you really want to get better at what you do," I said, I could sit here and coach you on what I know about sales, and we could do role playing, and we can talk about how you're approaching your prospects and how you close them and all that stuff. And I said, "But here's this person in your company who is clearly demonstrating that they know what they're doing." And I said, "If you're going out to New York, I'm going to challenge you. Why not go to lunch with her?" I said, "People in general like to help other people. And she may not know that you have these feelings about her, which is a good thing." And I said, "So I'm going to challenge you. What would it be like for you to call her up, invite her to lunch, and say to her, 'Look, I see that you're the top sales rep, and I'm so curious what you're doing so I can learn from you because I want to get better myself.'" And I said, "And take it or leave it. You don't have to be her best friend. It's a business opportunity for you to learn and see what you can take away from that. Even just one good nugget to help you be better at what you're doing." So what's interesting is, so she took it on. She decided to do it. She contacted her ahead of time, like I had suggested, and they scheduled the day because she was only going to be there for a certain period of time. So they scheduled the day. The woman was excited to meet with her. She picked a place for them to have lunch. They went and had lunch. And when then she came back and we had a session, I said, "So how did it go?" She said, "I actually really like her." She goes, "Now that I had a chance to meet with her and just be with her over lunch," she goes, "I learned a lot about her. She actually was going through a divorce, and she opened up to me about it. We just talked kind of woman to woman. And yes, I learned some things from her to do for work in this role." She goes, "But I walked away seeing a different side of her that I didn't before." So this is what I mean by we create stories and we make assumptions, and sometimes we're right, often we're not. It's just how we are. Like our brain judges to keep us safe. So when you understand that, you can also understand that sometimes we misinterpret, and we don't always have all the information. There's always what we don't know. We don't know.
Oh, that's a great story. And I'm sure that story probably plays over and over in a lot of situations. I remember when I got into sales, I was in the banking industry, and I was told I needed to start entertaining clients, bringing them into the banking center. I was running banking centers for half my career and host them for lunch. And as an introvert, that sounded terrifying. And so I just made the list of people, what I was going to talk to. I did a lot of planning and preparing for it. And then it just blossomed. It just took over, and it became comfortable and common to the point where my boss, was talking about my development and said, look around at all these people that you work with in this company, and pick out one or two things about each person you really admire and take those on as your own. And that's what I did. And that just really helped reinforce and grow me as a person, as a professional. And obviously it translated into a successful career too. But, I love stories like that because, yeah, I mean, those type of stories, you're led to think one thing. And once you really tap in, you realize there's more than meets the eye.
Yeah, there's so much to who we are as human beings. And yes, we all have commonalities, and there's something unique about each of us. And so, getting curious in that way. I love what you did. I want to acknowledge it. And in doing that, I'm also modeling to the audience what I'm doing. And one of the things that I have coached individual leaders on, because it's important, as well as facilitated conversations within teams, is around strengths and recognition, because we don't get that enough. How often do we say, "Gosh, Susie, I really loved what you did," and I bet the people that were on the receiving end of that saw something new about themselves or somebody else that they hadn't before, until you inspired them to take a conscious look, an intentional look at it, right? It in facilitating that dialogue within teams, I'll say, just for the next 30 minutes, just pick somebody on the team and acknowledge them, tell them what they see as a strength in them, and then talk about how you saw that show up. What did they do? Was it with the customer? Was it with a stakeholder? What was the impact that it had on them, on the stakeholder, on the work that you're doing, and recognize them for that. And what's interesting is what I also have observed in that is, especially in a group environment, so let's say that it's me, you, and say 4 other people. So there's 6 of us. And I'm acknowledging or recognizing you or identifying a strength that you have. What typically people will do is they'll say, so what Susie did is, when she was talking with the client, I really appreciated, how she engaged them in the conversation. Instead of, even in the virtual world, instead of me saying, as if I'm looking in your eyes, as if we're sitting right in front of each other, and saying, Susie, what you did when I observed you talking to the client and how you engaged them and the reaction that they had to that, I really saw how much they trusted you, and how, that has a big impact on their trust of our company and our product as a whole, because of how you showed up for them. Can you hear the difference? Because I'm talking to you versus about you. And even just that small tweak can make a huge difference. And people we don't naturally do that.
We don't. And yeah, it's that first time, it's probably pretty uncomfortable. I would imagine getting people to step out of, especially now in the culture we're in, with this isolation you've talked about, and with not engaging and we're on our phones a lot more and less. I mean, I've noticed that we're less, um, meeting people for coffee or a walk or whatever. Maybe we are, but I just see that. I would think that it would be a little bit uncomfortable first.
Well, I think even before looking back, even when, before COVID and things got super virtualized, I think people struggled with that anyway, because we're not taught these things. I wasn't taught this stuff. Um, I've looking back, I've done some personal healing on some things that I experienced when I was younger, where I didn't realize I had a hard time looking at people in the eye and really speaking to them directly, or speaking to you directly. And one of my mentors also years ago taught me a distinction in terms of using I statements. So how that looks again, and this all has to do with communication, by the way. Now that we're talking about it, it's, for example, I'll say, when you're in a situation and somebody shows up that you don't know, and it gets really uncomfortable, so you kind of get quiet, and instead of, even though I'm talking about myself and I'm using you statements, I'm saying, when you and you, it's like, am I talking about you or am I talking about myself? So it's really empowering, actually. It changes the whole experience when I say, and in practicing I statements, and I'll model it right now. So Susie, sometimes when I'm in an environment where I meet someone that I know and they've invited other people, I'll notice that when other people show up whom I don't know, I get a little uncomfortable, and I tend to get a little quiet, and I wait for them to say something, or when I see a door open, I'll get curious and maybe ask them a question to prompt a conversation for me to get to know them. Can you hear the difference? Like, where I'm speaking in you terms versus I terms, and what the tendency is when it's more personal, whether it's using I statements for myself or what I demonstrated earlier about acknowledging somebody's strengths and recognizing them, say in a group environment, and talking to them directly, more details come out and it feels more personal. And when I've coached people on this, especially when it's the strengths and recognition thing, I'll ask, how is that different for you? What did you notice about yourself? What did you notice about the other person? And then I'll ask the person on the receiving end, how is that different for you? Of how when they were speaking about you before versus how they were speaking directly to you the second time around, because I'll have them do it a second time around. And they'll say, yeah, it felt more personal and more meaningful.
Oh, definitely more meaningful. I'm curious, do you recommend any communication books for your clients, or could you recommend a communication book for anyone listening?
Susie knows this. So I'm traveling a lot right now. And so I got rid of over 95% of my belongings. I don't know if I told you that, but so I got rid of all my books. But so from memory, for nonverbal body language, there was one book that I loved that was called You Say More Than You Think.
Oh, wow.
And it was written by a woman who, God, what's the agency? She worked with law enforcement, FBI, and she was involved in situations where they would want to capture some pretty high level, let's just say, bad guys. And I know I'm kind of dumbing it down, but she would coach them on how to read them and get them to talk. And she was really good at, using her own body language and reading their body language to create rapport, to then get information that they needed by developing trust. So, and she's got some really interesting, simple things to think about, like, what is she? I think she called it the belly button rule, that when our belly buttons are actually facing each other, it's sort of like eye contact, but just notice when your belly button is facing somebody else's belly button or not. And I also have a feeling because I mean I read that a long time ago, and then now over the past few years I've been learning about energy and frequency and all of that and how our body gives it off too. And so I have a feeling that there's something there to it as well. Another fun one is notice in terms of left and right. So I'll notice that when I walk into a room, say it's like a big hall where there's going to be somebody on a stage or a speaker, do I have a tendency to walk to the left side of the room or the right side of the room? Do I like to sit on, say, the end of like the left side of the aisle or the right side of the aisle or somewhere in the middle? Am I okay with that? Um, and I was coaching somebody a couple of weeks ago on something where it was a block. It was a block for herself, and it was a block in her business, but it was more deep rooted. And I had a feeling it wasn't her voice; it was somebody else's voice. And uh, maintaining confidentiality, more or less, what I helped her surface is that it's like which part of this is your voice and which part of it is somebody else's. And so we pulled those things apart. And then I said, okay, whose voice is that? And it was her mother's voice. And I said, okay, if you were to have a conversation with her right now, because your mom's not here, no judgment, right? No judgment about this. We just want to transform this and reframe it for you. So if your mom was here, pretend like she's sitting here with us. Is she sitting to your left or your right? And she said, oh, she's sitting to my left. I said, great, face her. And maybe that's where the belly button thing came in. So pretend like, I didn't say this to her, but as if you're speaking to her, what would you like to say to her about this so that you can have a breakthrough in it? And so she said it. And I said, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm your mom for a moment and respond to that so that you can hear a different response than what's been modeled to you your whole life. And so we did that role play. And then afterwards I said, okay, where are you at with this right now? What's coming up for you? What new awareness do you have about it? And how has this shifted for you? But it all came from, okay, first of all, where is she sitting? And that it's in relation to our body, that, our physiology and our physicality and the energy that we give off, all of that plays a huge part.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, as I was listening to you, I thought about my health coaching training and how we focused in on inner child work and the limited beliefs that we're told from our family members and the people we were closest to, and maybe those are outdated. And then I too have gotten into energy work, and I certainly can I can walk into a room and read the energy in the room. And I think now, as I have healed and done my own healing process, I give off a much different energy than I've ever given off, and I know that I'm healing, and I'm a much healthier, happier person. So I think what you're encompassing through your coaching, both individually and in teams, if I can say this, is you're working with those people and healing some things and maybe uncovering some things that have limited them in their success and their growth.
That's the goal, right? I mean, it's on the onset. I have to talk about these things in a very tactical and practical way, because depending on who I'm working with, especially I've worked with a lot of people, say in engineering. And I also work with a lot of men, and men as very much as women are emotional, and yet how they interact with their own emotions is very different. And that, I'm generalizing because every person is unique. We all have a unique journey and where we're at with all of that. So there are absolutely men out there that are amazing at this and have done a lot of healing, and whether that was required or not, but they're really good communicators. They're good listeners. They're really susceptible to all of this. But yeah, so I try to make how I help people very practical, it's something that they can use and do right away. I try to make it easy for people. And I will also, I share philosophies with clients often. And one of them is, it's only as big of a deal as you make it. So especially when they need to have what might perceived to be a challenging or difficult conversation, Well, if you looked at it through the lens of it's only as big of a deal as I make it, and if this wasn't a big deal, okay, now what does that open up for me? And then it's giving them practical tools or tips, role playing, languaging, process on how to approach something. Now it feels more doable, and then it's a matter of, okay, what's going to give you the courage? Are you up for this? Sometimes they're like, yep, I'm ready. Sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know. And then we'll have to talk through that. And then I'll say, look, this is not about getting it perfect. This is not about getting it right. This is about practicing. You got to practice it, and you're not going to know how to get it, how to get more comfortable with it, or get it in what I call your cellular memory in your body, which is sometimes why I role play with people, because now it's in their cellular memory, and their brain and their body will remember that they've at least practiced it once before and what that felt like, and then it'll make it easier for them to go do it with whomever that person is, whether it's their manager or a teammate or a stakeholder, or maybe it's someone in your personal life. Um, but yeah, I try to, that's one of the things that has been nice feedback that I've been given, is that I give people very easy, practical tools and techniques to actually go put these things into practice and make a difference in their life.
Well, and that's it. I'm a big believer in small steps lead to big changes, and keeping it small and not overwhelming. And so you've just reinforced that, and I just find this fascinating stuff. This all of this is just so interesting, and I'm just curious, Alanna, what else are you working on?
Appreciate that. Yeah, I have a side passion project. I'll try to make it quick, but so 20 years ago, I wrote an ebook, because I'm single, I'm not married, I don't have kids, and so I've had quite a bit of roommates, and I've also lived alone. In fact, right now I'm living alone, and so I go through different stages of it. But 20 years ago, I wrote an ebook when ebooks were first coming out about roommates, and so I wrote this book, but I didn't know what I was doing, and so I saved it to my computer, and I didn't do anything with it. And over the years, somebody would say something, and I'd remember, and I'd find it on my computer. I couldn't believe I still had it. I'd read it and be like, oh, I should add this. I should update that. I still didn't know what I was doing. I still didn't feel the inspiration quite yet. And so I'd save it, and it would sit on my computer. Well, a year and a half ago, it came up again, and I finally realized I need to do something with this. So I updated it once again based on where I'm at now in my life, in my 50s. And having had the experience that I have. And then I started to show it to a couple people to say, hey, what are your thoughts about this? Is this even worth it for me to do something? And then a couple people thought, oh my gosh, yes. And this would be really great for women who have been divorced or who have been widowed, or even single women like myself, who we might financially need to live with someone else because things are, getting so expensive, or that we want to out of, companionship or loneliness. And the same for women that have been divorced. They might find themselves in situations financially where, like, oh God, I have to live with someone else, whether they rent out a room in their house or they have to go find an apartment or a room somewhere. Same thing with widows, right? So I worked with a graphic designer. I, made it pretty, and it's called the Co-Living Companion, a comprehensive guide to cohabitating with others successfully. And the feedback I've also been given is that this information would be helpful to anyone of any age, even say college students. But for marketing purposes, right now, I'm going to be promoting it to older women who are in these types of scenarios that I'm talking about. And I've completed some recorded interviews of experts who support people in those life situations, like a real estate agent who specializes in working with, divorced people, or those have been widowed, or divorce coaches, grief coaches. I'm probably about to interview a financial advisor. So additional, companion supportive information to work with this practical. That's what I've been, like, oh, this is so practical. And I guide you through things that while you're going through something that might be emotional that can throw us off, this practical information will help ground you and guide you on things that you need to think about logically that you might not be able to because you're going through all the emotions of grief or healing or whatever it is in these type scenarios. So that's a passion project. So, and by the time I think this interview will be up on your YouTube channel, I think it'll be out and available for purchase.
Well, that's exciting. I think it's great that you kept this book, and maybe the timing then wasn't right, but now the timing is right to and you've had lots of experience between then and now to really uh, um, add to the book and make it even more pertinent. So congratulations. That's exciting news. I'm happy to receive it and read it. And so I always ask my guests, what's your SOS? What is one or two steps that for people who are listening today that they can do to move their life forward? Obviously, they can call you or reach out to you, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what are those one or two steps that they can take away today?
It's funny. It seems like a simple question, but it's actually a big one. And it really depends on them, on what they're going through, and what is it, what do they want? Who do you want to be that you're not being? What do you want to have that you don't have? What do you want to be doing that you're not doing right now? And even just asking yourself those three questions can be really helpful for self-awareness and clarity. And then I'm kind of jumping forward a bit, but I'm big on, writing down your goals and things that you want to achieve or experience or do or have happen. And then what happens is people get overwhelmed. The big question that comes up a lot is like, well, how do I do this? And I always say, forget that step, because you're gonna create the how as an obstacle for yourself, and you don't even realize that you're doing it. And a lot of the time, subconsciously, they might be doing it because they're not ready, or they're just merely in fear. And then, there's two acronyms for fear. One is false evidence appearing real. There's that one, right? That's an old one. A new one that I love is face everything and rise. So my other tip,
I know that.
yeah. So my other tip is, after you get this clarity and you start thinking about things that you want to do or experience or have, and you want to move forward, don't worry about the how. I always say, what's just the very next step? Just the very next step, the first step. Just don't worry about the whole journey ahead. It's good to create a vision. It's helpful to work with a coach on that so that you don't get overwhelmed and you don't get too far ahead of yourself, to really map it out. Even if you did, I would say, great. Now that you've created the vision, because that can be overwhelming for people, and sometimes they even talk themselves out of it, is like, now come back to now. What's just the very next step? Just one little thing that you can do to move the needle forward and create movement. Identify that and go do it.
Perfect. Those are perfect things for our listeners and viewers to take with them. So, Alanna, is there anything else you'd like to share that maybe we didn't talk about?
Oh, gosh. This is a really tough time, I think, for us humans. And what we're going through is on a level that I don't really know if we've ever, I've only been on the planet for 50 something years, but just be really aware of how much you're focusing on yourself, and you're not self-centered for doing that. There's another distinction I share, which is the difference between being self-centered or being selfish. And I think we've learned that being selfish is really bad. And actually, I don't think people are selfish enough. Self-centered is a different story, right? But really focus on what's going to bring you joy. What's going to, give you what you need, while being empathetic and compassionate to other people. But I think there's so many people that are so focused on things outside of themselves, like what's happening in the world and, how that's going to stop them, or, doom and gloom. Things are terrible. Yeah, things are hard. Things are hard right now. And we're going to get through this. We are. I believe in us as a human race, and the determination that we have, and the goodness in our hearts of who we really are at our core. And a lot of us, we've lost our way. And, I've had to really be cognizant of this myself over the past few years of when am I spiraling and focusing too much on that stuff, that, there's what you can control, there's what you can't control. So like really notice what is going to give you joy, what's going to make you happy. And one more thing, this is it. We have one life to live. And regardless of your spiritual or your religious belief systems, even if you believe, which I do, I believe that we come back, and we live multiple lives. At the same time, I know, using I statements, I will never be Alanna Levenson again. I will never live this life as a coach. I won't be in this life with the family that I have, the friends that I have, what I do right now for work. This is it. And so I've had to even reflect on that for myself over the past few years of me wanting to rebuild my business and do things that were scary to me, like even doing conversations like this, or doing videos on YouTube. Oh my God, I resisted that for years, Susie. And I'm finally doing
Yes,
it.
understand that.
Yeah. And it's like, why not? None of us can take any of this with us. And so I think on a soulful level, this is just about growth and expanding who we are. And part of that is self-love, and part of that is showing love for others. And what does that mean, especially in a world where it's getting harder and harder to do that?
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end our conversation. I want to ask you, where can listeners and viewers find you?
So I'll send Susie the links, because with my name and my domain name of my business, it's a little challenging. But I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on there a lot. I'm on Facebook. I have a business page and a personal page. I also have a website. My website, it's ilovemylife.com. But there are dashes or hyphens between each word. So it's I-love, L-O-V-E -my-life.com. And I'm just getting a YouTube channel started myself. And so all that stuff. But I'm mostly on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and then there's my website. And then they can also download a free ebook or guide if they go to my website and just give me your name and email on procrastination. So if you get in your own way, and you want a good guide to help you understand what the myths are, to create some movement and just do that very next step, there's a free guide on my website that you can download, get on my newsletter. I won't clog your inbox. I send them out maybe once or twice a week. And I would love to meet some people from your audience.
That'd be great. Well, Lana, it's just been a fascinating conversation. I know we could talk more and more. There were so many different nuggets that I think we could have expanded on, but I've enjoyed it. And I thank you for coming on SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I think it's an important conversation, and I wish you all the best, and I hope our paths cross again.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Susie. I appreciate it.
Well, friends, sadly, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for listening and watching to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. And thank you, Alanna, for being my guest today. It's been a fascinating conversation about how we can become better leaders, team members, individuals in relationships of all types, and how communication can help us move forward one step at a time. A quick reminder on how you can support this podcast: like, share, and subscribe. and send me a review. And if you have any questions or a question you'd like answered, feel free to send that to me. And maybe one day it'll be featured on a future episode. Follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And if you'd like to be added to my weekly email newsletter, feel free to share your email address. I'm happy to include you. And reach out to me if you're interested in finding out about health coaching or breathwork sessions. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon.